So just to introduce myself real quick, I'm a partner at KPMG. I lead up our West Coast region for our major project advisory group. I'm an engineer by background. I've been working with IPD projects for about 15 years, and they've come a long way in the last 15 years. So I really wanted today just talk a little bit about kind of the process and some better practices. As my experience looking at projects for that amount of time, I've seen successes and I've seen quite a few challenges as well. And just sharing some of those kind of views is kind of what I wanted to get through today. But so just really quickly, I'll touch on this. I know we're running out of time for Q&A. But when we think about setting up an IPD project or program, we really look at it very similar, and you've heard this from many, but there are key steps that need to be kind of understood by the team, by the owner, and really, there's IPD isn't for every project, and it's not for every owner. You do have to, when you initially look at it, what is that delivery strategy? And I think it's also noted on a single project, you may not have certainly all parties within the integrated form of agreement. So laying out that strategy and how you want to deliver your project is critical. And then, I think as you noted, the IPD partner selection process, it really is so important, the team you select. And I'd say most of the challenges that I've seen over the years come down to particular partners who were unwilling or unable to shift from a traditional model to a much more kind of open, collaborative model, and just making sure that there's a really robust process. And if you're embarking on an IPD program or project for the first time, understanding what the capabilities are and working with those partners, knowing that they may not be fully ready to make the transition, but everybody on the whole team needs to know that. So it's so critical in that selection process. And I also recommend not necessarily going full IFOA, IPD, every single lean tool on day one. It is a journey to get there. And the partners you select as an owner over time and as a contractor work with over time, build that skill set. And it really is critical to understand that. And I would also say when you look at those partners, it's not just the leadership, the principals of the firm, the senior VPs. It is the supervisors in the field. It's the people on the ground in the trades who are actually sequencing activities and working, make sure all the activities are coordinated during construction as well. So it really is looking at that full vertical and obviously horizontally throughout the organizations as well. And then I won't touch much on this because John just went over this, but the commercial terms, but I'll just reiterate, there is no such thing as a standard form that is meant to be off the shelf, sign it. Everyone is negotiated, especially in this environment, because there are so many, I'll probably use a different term, but kind of soft language in there, and kind of figuring out what that means to everybody, because it would be shocking to think about how people misinterpret what the word profit means. What's in it? I mean, you think something like profits would be pretty straightforward, but it's really not in this environment. So even those terms that you think are simple, need to be understood and agreed to among all the parties. And then developing your governance structure and operating model. Really, it's how you're going to work together. It should be documented contractually. The operating model should be understood. You should choose the tools you're going to use and how you're going to make decisions and who's going to make those decisions, and getting that laid out certainly as early as possible in the process. And then of course project delivery and actually delivering the project. And this is being shown in really a linear fashion here. And I'll just say it's not necessarily done in a linear fashion. There's a lot of iterative stuff where certain components are agreed to well before project delivery or construction. Certainly when you've got the design components, early planning, all the estimating processes and so forth, that so it's not a pure linear thing by any means. And certainly then have the warranty defect period, and then project financial close, which is critically important when you have this kind of a shared risk and reward, and making sure that everybody's books are in alignment and real costs are being shown in the right buckets to determine the final kind of risk and reward payout for everybody. And then really quickly on the bottom, just kind of directionally showing the different advisors and other groups that are typically involved. And I know these have been alluded to, but an IPD facilitator advisor, very common when owners are starting out in this, and it may not be for all the activities across the life cycle of an IPD project. And certainly as owners and project teams become more sophisticated, there's less of a need for that, but something to consider throughout the life cycle. And then I think, the whole transparency around financial project systems, cost controls, and having kind of an independent view, look at that, trust but verify is incredibly critical. Once again, it's really difficult to break down the walls of mistrust and without actually opening up books completely. And I've seen it over and over again where somebody's like, well, I'm not going to give you the breakdown of my labor rates. That's our secret. We don't want to show it. You can't participate in something like this effectively if you're a trade partner or a contractor that's not willing to fully open up the books. And then I know this is a bit controversial, the independent estimator in a IPD space, but for more complex projects, it is really critical to have that kind of independent view, and how you do that can be different ways. But there is, in the engineering and architecture world, there's a common phenomenon called optimism bias, and we think we can always solve things and it's going to work out. And having that independent view really gives you a way to kind of kick the tires. And everybody on the team should really be open to that if you're in this all together, because it is a helpful activity. I've seen projects that have gone $100 million over budget, and constructing how they got there, it should have been known 6 months before they told the board they had to go 100 million over budget. And then obviously the legal counsel and the role there, obviously is very critical, working through the terms and conditions and the contractual agreements throughout that. And hopefully you will never need a claims advisor, but there is oftentimes still a role for that. So it's just to kind of put it all together and how this kind of works, and the phases that you need to think about in getting an IPD program set up, IPD project. And then I kind of alluded to some of these, but just want to touch on a few more here. But once again, because it's so reliant on the team and the resources and the firms, just having an incredible strong kind of pre-qualification process, certainly having multiple vendors and trade partners that you can use on projects. You want to be able to pick the best one and not just always go with the same vendor every single time. Once again, rigorous scoping, and this isn't necessarily you have to have the design obviously done, because that's not the purpose of IPD, but really laying out how IPD is going to operate. And making sure everybody understands that and how they're going to work together. The enhanced due diligence of the contractor target costs, and this kind of goes with potentially the independent estimator as well, but just making sure everybody understands that. And I think it was mentioned multiple times, the owner has to know all the detail here. They got to be able to understand how this is all put together, what are the assumptions around it, what are the risks, and I've seen owners put individuals in charge of doing that don't have the background experience or capability to do it. So it's really important to have the right team involved and the right resources, but looking at that really critically. I would also say around documentation, this is also a bit of a controversy in IPD, but making sure that it's understood what really needs to be documented and what doesn't, because memories are short, and we see it all the time where the collaborative decision making maybe doesn't always get the same rigor of the documentation around how the outcome and why the outcome of that decision was made, and at the end of the day, when if things don't work out wonderfully, it's hard to go back and kind of understand what happened. And it's not just to point fingers, but it's to lessons learned, right? If you don't have that and you're sitting there a year later and you don't remember why, or people still aren't around from that, it's really hard to have a good continuous improvement lessons learned program for a contractor, architect, or the owner. So that's just kind of a view on documentation. There's a balance for sure. And then I think everybody's touched on the rigorous communication and so forth, so I won't belabor that. The other thing on here, maybe the other thing is kind of this financial oversight, contractor costs. You'd really do, once again, it should be something that's checked on a fairly regular basis. Now, if you have a really short-term project, maybe you can look at the beginning and towards the end of the project for the financial close. But a lot of IPD projects tend to be, at least the ones I get involved with, are multi-year projects that are very large. And we typically see, if you're not checking on a fairly regular basis and opening up everybody's books, sometimes things get kind of swept under the carpet. Maybe a trade partner's hiding additional costs, and so they're feeling pressure on profit, but nobody really knows it, right? So they're behaving a little bit different in meetings because they already know they're going to be challenged from a profitability perspective and don't want to share that. But we recommend at a minimum on longer term projects quarterly going in and checking, if not on the very large projects, on a monthly basis, making sure that the costs are validated appropriately. So I think those are really the main things from a lessons learned. I think everybody else kind of touched on a lot of other things, but once again, it is a journey, and figuring out how to go about this, moving into IPD projects in a controlled and meaningful way is really important, because I've seen too many projects fail, but the ones who kind of went up, the owners and the contractors who went around it with eyes wide open and understood you're not going to get necessarily every reported potential benefit out of IPD on project number 1, maybe not project number 2, but project 3, project 4, and as you continue, you're going to see substantial benefits that come out of IPD. But it's patience, it's working in a way that's very different than a traditional model. So
great, thank you very much. Yep. Reid, appreciate it, and appreciate everybody's time and their presentations. I'm sure that everybody's benefited from all the information that was presented. As I mentioned, we made maybe 2 or 3 different discussion meetings, and that's the what you saw in the past hour was our summary of our presentations and discussions that we had.